short-range fighter.
This single line was the first official statement that TIE fighters could not jump to hyperspace. The average Star Wars fan has always known, of course, that TIE fighters can't jump to light speed, whereas other fighters of a similar size can. But what if the original intent of A New Hope was that all fighters were short-range fighters? Now, this video is going to be the first of maybe, or maybe not, a series of many fan theories I have in regards to Star Wars, considering my incessant obsessional passion of it. Of course, I've been holding back because I either get distracted or I can't be bothered to get dressed to show myself on video, but you know what? I don't even have to do that. So for this reason, I've decided to adopt and be inspired by the format of other YouTubers who make these kinds of videos. So, onward to the main point of this video. What if X-Wings, Y-Wings, and any other fighter craft in Star Wars were never meant to ever jump to hyperspace? Whatever give you that idea, you ask? Well, a couple of things actually. Obi-Wan introduced us to the fact that TIEs are short-range fighters. But if you really pay attention to his second line, the entire premise is actually quite revealing of just why.
A fighter that size couldn't get this deep into space on its own.
A fighter that size can't get that deep into space on its own. Why is that? Well, there could be two reasons in my mind. One, ever since A New Hope, we've known that space travel in Star Wars can take weeks to months. Now, can you imagine sitting in an extremely confined space strapped to a chair with no room to move for weeks or months of travel? What a mess. Two, the second reason, and this is a very key point to the theme of this video, that maybe fightercraft were too small to have hyperdrives installed. Now, with this statement in mind, do we see any indication of that in the movie? Well, yes, we do. Comparing the size of fightercraft in A New Hope compared to the size of the TIE fighter, you'll notice they really aren't that different. And it's the size, Obi-Wan stated, of why TIEs were short-range fighters. Yet you might say, if we look later into the trilogy, the A-Wings are even smaller and do have hyperdrives. But I'll get to the sequel movies of the original trilogy a bit later. It's very interesting to note that in A New Hope, we never see fighter craft jump to light speed, only larger craft. This really, along with the lines from Obi-Wan, was the beginnings of my theory. Now, jumping forward into Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, it's interesting to note that they were not written by Lucas, even though he was involved. Thus, this gives possible credit to the idea that small ships travelling long distances in the later movies are potentially continuity errors or oversights of what have may been the original vision for spacecraft in Star Wars. Something Lucas merely put up with, perhaps, just as he did with many other things. In fact, it's only in Return of the Jedi we see fighters actually jump to light speed. In Empire Strikes Back, of course, it's implied, with Luke travelling around the galaxy from Hoth, Dagobah, and Bespin. So technically the idea of X-Wings being able to jump to hyperspace began in Empire, if you look at it that way. Though you could make the argument that the planets were all really close together, and Luke only ever travelled in sub-light speed. Of course, the math on that, considering the time Empire Strikes Back spans and the implied distance between planets, is very questionable, so I'm not going to make that argument. It's safe to assume Luke hyperspaced in Empire off-screen, and that was the beginnings of long-range fighter travel in Star Wars. So I blame you, Lawrence Kasdan. Of course, every Star Wars fan will say, well, it's explained in the lore, TIEs don't have hyperdrives because it was cheaper for mass production, and it makes them more maneuverable. And yes, I'm well acquainted with the lore on that, make no mistake. However, my theory looks to the Star Wars movies alone, without any additional content or lore written in the EU, as we have to remember Lucas nor any of the Star Wars filmmakers were ever involved in that. So it's for that reason I'm throwing aside the lore, and that I'm looking to the movies as standalone products in that regard. Typically, the EU was written by other fans and novelists, and is often used as a tool to fill in plot holes and errors in continuity, of which I'm proposing fighters having hyperdrives in the latter movies of the original trilogy may be one of everyone has overlooked. But are there any other lines of suggestive evidence to support the theory? Well, it's interesting to note we never see fighters jump to hyperspace in the prequels either, without hyperspace rings, that is. Which, after I came up with this theory, I find a little suspect in hindsight. Maybe Lucas wanted to just give the impression of technological development in the saga, but maybe this was on purpose on part of Lucas to correct or make up for another one of his perceived movie flaws. If my theory was correct, of course, but this is all just conjecture. It's worth noting, however, that Lucas is well known for trying to address what he sees as mistakes in his movies through various mediums, be it the special editions or making retcons or explanations for things in other movies. It's the same reason he had Anakin call Qui-Gon's lightsaber a laser sword in The Phantom Menace, as he prefers that term to lightsaber, as it was Alec Guinness who coined that term. So, was the original intent of A New Hope for all fighter craft to be short-range fighters? Who knows? It's just really a fun theory on my part.